temperature outside my office is minus 12 degrees Celsius, something you will never see in your lifetime down in Southeast Asia and Asia. So let's talk about Rouge monitoring. For the agenda today, we're going to talk about background on Rouge and its development, and also the technology of Rouge control and monitoring, how corrosion actually develops, the applications of Rouge monitoring in pharmaceutical water systems, and of course, data examples, charts, and graphs of actual sites with actual data, and a comparative Rouge test from two different applications that are used throughout the industry and chemistry. And then a page of conclusions, and then after that will be Q&A. So background on Rouge and its development is virtually very, very simple. I'm going to see if I can get rid of this just for a second here. Rouging is a thin film of iron oxide hydroxide, usually reddish brown in color or golden in color. And it's typically found in stainless steels because we use a lot of stainless steels at hot temperatures. Rouge can also consist, though, of other oxides, including chromium oxide, nickel, molybdenum oxide, and even tungsten oxide. Approximately 75% of all the stainless steel that's used today in the industry is actually recycled stainless steel, and tungsten is used during recycling. When that happens, it means that there are other oxides that are formulated that cause Rouge also, not just iron. Iron is the most prevalent because it's over 60% of what's made up in stainless steel. Rouge is prevalent in the biotech and pharmaceutical industries because we use a tremendous amount of 316 and 316L stainless steel and operate typically at temperatures that are very high. Not all the time. There are many ambient systems out there. They still Rouge also, but not as flagrantly as high temperatures. Rouge normally forms on the inside of surfaces like distillation units, storage tanks, valving, piping, pump housings, fittings, etc., and in process vessels. And of course, you see it on heat exchangers too. Even though heat exchangers are not part of the actual flow of the water in our system, you see a lot of Rouge on heat exchangers also due to the hot temperatures and the oscillation of temperatures from hot to cold. There are three different classifications of Rouge. The first one being called Class 1, which is primarily Rouge that is migratory from another source. If you see particulates, usually between 20 to 50 microns in size, those are usually particulates that come off of the impellers, and then they migrate throughout the system due to the flow of the water. But that water and the particulates in that water are not part of the infusion into the metal. So it doesn't interact with the metal. It adheres to the metal as a particulate, and it can be easily removed with wipes, hand wipes in particular. Class 2 Rouge, though, is interactive with the metal, and it causes pitting and corrosion, formulates those beautiful colors of the golden, the reds, the gold, and the oranges. You can see them all the time. They're very succinct. It can only be removed by chemical etching and is primarily formulated at temperatures between 1 or 0 degrees Celsius up to 99 degrees Celsius. And it formulates hematite, which is a ferric oxide that's a little bit more complex than a ferric hydroxide. Class 3, though, on the other hand, is dark blue or black and purple-ish color, and it is somewhat benign. It actually formulates almost an annealing effect on the inside of piping, and its formulation is magnetite. Magnetite being a more complex ferric oxide than even hematite. Hematite is Fe2O3 and magnetite is Fe3O4. Magnetite, though, rapidly forms in hot water, superior hot water, and hot water that is usually at different levels, including superheated water and steam. And if you open up your pure steam systems, most likely you'll see magnetite. It can also formulate in water too, as you'll see. This is two pump impellers from two different sites. You can see one over here, the pump impeller is actually a little bit better, and there's a lot of rouging outside of the pump impeller on the housing where it's sitting. On the other one, you can see that the rouge is on the pump impeller and on the housing and on the casing around that particular unit. Both of these rouges, if they flake off, will formulate those particulates we talked about. The rouge on here is primarily hematite and is class 2 rouge, but the particulates which could be taking off it would be class 1. This is inside a pipe bore, that color that we talked about before. The orange is the coloring, the light oranges, the golden colors, and certainly the non-brick reds, usually also hematite. This is usually a very small amount of film. It's on the inside of the stainless steel. So rouge does develop, and it develops highly. And one other thing you might want to figure out about the impellers is because the impellers rotate all the time during when you do a derouging passivation in order to keep the flow running, they never really get passivated. So impellers by themselves are rarely passivated with the chemicals. This over here is a spray ball. If you notice the color, you can see that it is that dark blackish color, dark purple. This is a spray ball and running in a system. You can see there's little holes in the spray ball. This is being surrounded though by a bag. And what happened was the QA/QC came in and they felt that they were better engineers than the engineering staff. So they said, we want you to put a bag around your spray ball so that none of this will flake off and get into our water system downstream. But as you can see, that is that black or dark purple rouge, which is annealing effect. It can't flake off. It can only be removed with phosphoric acid at 80% and 80 degrees Celsius. So the possibility of this actually flaking off is negligible. Unfortunately, because QA/QC often uses more from the stomach issues and it formulates QC queasiness, they don't necessarily abide by all engineering issues or understand them completely. Here is two different vessels. The one on the left is a WFI vessel. The one on the right is also a storage vessel with a spray ball. And you can see the dark rouge over here on the right-hand side. This rouge has been there for a while. It's very extensive and it should be removed. It's not only the discoloration, but the point is that it could cause corrosion over time to the vessel. Also, when you do derouging passivation, it will remove some of the metal from the metal layers, which means that the thickness of the metal will degrade over time. Some people say, well, I put in filters into my system and they're turning red. And I say, well, that's a good thing. And they say, what do you mean it's a good thing? Well, it means that it's taking out the particulates that are actually in the water. You can see over here, there's a kind of a pinkish color, reddish color to this particular membrane, being a 0.45. Even WFI water systems can have membranes on them and filters. There is no law whatsoever. There is no guideline. There is no mandate that says you cannot have filters on a hot WFI water system. And if you want to put them there, you can. Unfortunately, most people don't put them there because of a guideline that came out almost 40 years ago through the FDA. What the FDA said is you cannot use membranes specifically for microbial, but you can use it to stop particulates or whatever. So a lot of people don't even use membranes, but they can. And 0.22 or 0.45 are excellent at stopping particulate rouge from migrating across the system. What many people don't know is that gasketing and non-metallic gasketing like PTFE, ETFE, PVDF, et cetera, all have a slight negative charge. And rouge, which is coming as a particulate through the system, is a positive charge. And what will happen is that those filters and that material, even nylon, can attract those particular particulates, and they can be embedded even in a non-metallic gasket, like you're seeing here with PTFE. Many drug manufacturers are concerned about the possibility of particulate matter contaminating their products in sterile systems. Effective way to deal with this problem, though, may be to monitor the Rouge rate online, and in case of process upsets, to prevent the contamination, or actually to prevent the contamination from causing a process upset, which is probably more effective. If Rouge does affect the product, though, the product is deemed unusable. Currently, though, in most sites, Rouge rate development is currently unknown, and the formulation rate is currently unknown because there's no way in order to monitor it. At one time, we were looking at coupon systems that were put into the water system in order to see if we could measure Rouge on a coupon, take out the coupon, then send it off to a laboratory. Of course, the coupons were extraneous to the water system, which means that we had to put them inside, made them invasive, and then we had to pull the coupons out, shut down the water system, send it off to a lab. And then we would get a reading back and people would say, what do I do with this information? And no one knew. So they got rid of the coupons. And we decided to go to this kind of system, which I call QC queasiness. Lots of times, derouging passivation is determined by discoloration, or a time interval that someone decided by QC. So how did this happen? Typically QC would say, well, we're going to do derouging passivation once a year. And as a scientist, I would say, how did you arrive at that? They said, well, we do everything else at once a year. It was not based upon scientific data. It was based upon what QC could tolerate before they couldn't tolerate it anymore. The point is that by doing that, by setting up frequencies that are based on discoloration or a time interval with no scientific data, you're probably wasting a tremendous amount of money in chemicals and in downtime. The industry needs a way in order to determine formulation rates, thickness rates, development over time, a scientific method that should be integrated to determine frequency, and also determine when to actually do derouging passivation and what the needs would be. It should be an online instrument that integrates with all the rest of your existing online instrumentation. All water systems today are completely automated. They're completely computerized. And this is another device, an instrument, which can be installed and integrated into your computer system as it exists today. Should be easy to calibrate and maintain. Rouge is a form of corrosion, and corrosion is electrochemical phenomena based upon electron migration with a combination of a hydroxyl reticle. Whether we're doing corrosion of organics and oxidizing them to CO2, or we're doing metal, it's the same phenomena. Hydroxyl radicals there in order to change the chemistry into an oxide. Corrosion, though, can be determined by measuring a current and a potential across anode and cathode poles, which is what is done with this particular instrument. So what is the technology of corrosion? Well, if you look over here at the top equation, you'll see iron plus water plus oxygen is going to yield iron ions plus hydroxyls, which formulate ferrous hydroxide. Now, what happens in metal, and 316 metal, of course, is we have an anodic reaction and a cathodic reaction. The iron only comes out of the anodic reaction. And as it's liberated from the metal, the electrons migrate over to the cathodic side and then meld with the hydrogen and the water molecules to formulate more hydroxides. So there's hydroxides in the water and the iron is liberated. But notice the iron comes out of the metal. Corrosion is metal loss. It is not a deposition. What you're looking at inside those tanks is not deposition, it's metal loss. To give you a classic example, the Titanic is sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's not gaining any metal. It's only losing metal. And after tens of thousands of years or longer, the Titanic will no longer exist in the Atlantic Ocean. It's all metal loss. This particular screen shows what happens with temperature. When we increase in temperature from 20 degrees to 90 degrees C, what happens is that the amount of hydroxyls that are produced in WFI water increase almost exponentially. And the oxygen content is actually degasified. And the oxygen content goes lower as the temperature gets higher. The higher the hydroxyl radicals, the more corrosion that can ensue. That's why corrosion happens at very high temperatures in a very rapid manner. This particular graph shows the development of chromium oxide, which is the oxide that's there known as a passivation layer. That passivation layer is only 2.5 nanometers thick. It's a very, very, very small thin layer. It's not a firewall. It's a very small layer. And it decreases as the temperature increases. And notice that the ferric oxide rate, this showing hematite, increases sporadically from 20 degrees C and gets exponentially higher after 50 degrees C into almost 90 degrees C. So both the ferric oxide and the combination with the hydroxyls production is why the rouge is so prevalent in hot water systems. You don't want rouge in your system? Very simple. Don't use 316L stainless steel. Don't run them hot. Some of the best systems in the United States and in Europe run at 4 degrees Celsius and are completely oxygenated with ozone and are very, very, very pristine. So we talked about before is the idea of the anode. So we have an anode and cathode pole over here, as you can see on this particular side. That's embedded in the water. And what we're doing is we're doing this eye measurement across these two cathode poles using what's called the Stern-Gary equation from 1957. What this does is it allows us to show what the corrosion rate is and how that corrosion develops over time. That's how we derive at the RP, which is the resistance potential. Point is that we can measure this down to single nanometer levels and even less, but that's how it's measured. Only the probes themselves are sitting in the water. The body of the probe remains outside of the hygienic clamp. Some of the applications that we look at, when we do a derouging passivation, how long does it last? Well, minimum is usually 3 to 4 days. Sometimes it's longer, which depends on how many loops there are, how large the water system is, what the administration is, etc. There are chemical costs associated, which may be citric acid, nitric acid, phosphoric, etc. Most of the time in Asia, I think they're using citric acid. Sometimes phosphoric acid is also used. It costs money. But in order to get rid of those chemicals that are in the water, we have to do what is called acid waste neutralization. That's using caustics against the acid in order to bring the pH to as close to 7 as possible. In Singapore, as an example, where water is recycled through new water, bringing up the pH is extremely important because there are only certain levels of pH that are able to be dealt with in new water. And the water that goes back for recycling needs to have that a pH is close to 7. So using sodium hydroxide or ammonium hydroxide is how that's happening, how that happens. So you have chemical costs associated with the neutralization, you have labor costs and manpower, production shutdown, and every 3 to 6 months or quarter or annually or 18 months, some people will do the frequency. How is this determined? Well, it's not determined scientifically if you're doing it by discoloration or some SOP that was devised a decade or 2 decades ago by someone who probably no longer works in your company. So this is a typical water system we're looking at for WFI. We have a feed water system running purified water off of that purified water line, running into a distillation unit like a multi-effect still or a single effect still, and then running into a hot water storage tank out to our pump, out to our points of use and back. So that's typical for a WFI water system. It may not be exactly like yours, but it is typical. Some systems don't use multi-effect distillation. They'll use vapor compression stills, and they can use softened water, and they don't need purified water. Usually they'll purified water to distillation, multi-effect still, and then to WFI. So if we're looking at a fairly small system running at 76 liters per minute, or 15 liters per minute in the distillation unit, going out to a 38 liter per minute WFI water in storage with only a 2-inch piping loop running about 300 meters, what is the real cost of doing derouging passivation, even on this smaller system? Well, the actual cost in dollars, including chemicals and labor only, is about 30,000 US dollars. If you add in downtime of production in days, the client's labor, the non-production of the products because the system is down and can't produce product at that time over the day's time period, it can get very expensive very quickly. For a small system, we're talking about $50,000 and higher. But for larger systems and more expensive products, especially products that may cost a couple of $1 million per batch, then you can see that the cost of the downtime is outrageous. And the longer we can have uptime, the more product we can produce, the more revenue we can produce without having any changes up to the infrastructure is very, very worthwhile and very good. And besides that, we're not wasting money. Typically, a Rouge monitor has three different parts. First part is the transmitter and the probe. The probe, as you can see, is installed here showing a clear plastic pipe, but only the probes are down there. There's a 1.5 inch flange that runs on an adapter up to the bottom part of a transmitter, providing the power at 24 volts over to the power. And then there is a transmitter up on the top that sends the information wirelessly to a gateway. And that gateway itself can encompass many, many of these different devices, from 1 unit up to 60 units out in the field. The gateway then processes that information and then uses it in order to transmit the information through Modbus or whatever over to a computer system or to a data display or data distribution system, a building management system, SCADA or whatever. So the system over here sends this by wireless radio over to the gateway, it's processed in the gateway, sent over by Modbus over to the computer system, including Delta V, BMS, SCADA, whatever it might be that you're using. It's a pretty neat system in that you do not need to have electricity, don't need to plug it into the wall, and you can have everything integratable into the computer system you're already using to monitor your water system per se. So where do we install these units? Well, primarily the unit is installed directly down from the pump. Why? The pump, because of its cavitation and high velocity, will erode almost all of the thin film of the chromium oxide layer in a very, very rapid manner. What happens is that the pump itself and right here after the pump is going to be where there's the most amount of rouge that develops. You want to see what else is happening in the whole system, you put one on the return tank, return line back over the WFI storage tank, much like what you do with a TOC analyzer and a conductivity monitor by putting it back before it goes back into the tank in order to show if there's any degradation across the whole system. Of course, that information that's coming off of these units that goes down to a gateway, is then connected over to our SCADA system and displayed on our computer, integrated with all of our information that we're receiving off our automated system. You can also use Rouge in a steam system. This is showing a pure steam system at the top, which is a little more difficult to see across here, would be the steam header, and there would be a small 1 inch line coming off of that, of which we have a Spyrex, Sarco Spyrex steam trap, which will use as a condensate trap, which will convert it over into water from steam. That water will drip down to the bottom of this configuration of a device. It's a vessel, actually, just a spool piece. That particular spool piece will have inverted to it the Rouge monitor with its probes, and then allowed to have the information from the water go over to the SCADA system. This has a valve at the top, which is the upper limit of the water entrapment. Bottom valve is usually closed. So the idea here is we entrap the water. Even though it's not a one-to-one function of what's going on with the steam system, it's indicative of how the steam is developing of the Rouge inside the steam system and can be used in order to show the frequency for derouging passivation. Go through some data samples and charts. Over here on red is accumulation of rouge over time. The scale on the left side is in nanometers. So you can see when we introduced this particular unit on January the 14th, it was started to accumulate rouge and took about a month, and it went up to around 2 nanometers, 2.5 nanometers, total accumulation over time. The blue line at the bottom, though, is actually the reading every 20 minutes, which shows how the rouge monitor reacts to the water chemistry inside and the temperature and the operations of the water system. Also showing on January the 14th installation, it takes about 24 hours for the probe to acclimate itself inside the water system. And then you can see the accumulation starts from there, very, very, very small, showing indications around 1 or 2 nanometer. In order to look at this on a longer data purpose, same installation date. Red line, once again, is accumulation over time. So now we're looking at 2 months, and you can see the rouge accumulation is almost 7 nanometers over that 2-month time period. But down over here on the blue line, you start to see these information where you see peaks and going up and going down and then going up higher and coming down. And the question is, well, what is this data and what does it actually represent? You can see nanometers going up to as high as 15, 16, even 20 to 25, and then coming back down again. So we're going to concentrate on the data right over here, and I'll explain what's going on. So this is a hot water WFI system running at 80 degrees Celsius. And the hot water heater comes on when it goes below 80 degrees C, and it takes it up to 85 degrees C. So when the heater comes on, the rouge rate goes up because of the higher temperature. When the heater goes off, the rouge rate goes down. And when the heater comes back up, it goes back up again. And when the heater goes off, it goes back down. And what you're looking at, if you were looking at the mean of this data, it would be very flat, which is shown by the data over here on the left. Over here, at this point over here, you can see instead of running between 4 to 5 nanometers, all of a sudden we're below 2 nanometers. And the interesting issue is why? Well, it's very simple. What happens is we open up the valves to the points of use to fill up the vessels. And when you fill up the vessels, the contact time, the residence time of the water against the piping is lessened because I'm producing the WFI water, it's sitting in storage, and it's going out to the point of use. It's not recirculating in the same piping at 24/7. So what happens over here is as we're doing filling operations and usages, the water is very small. When we turn off the point of use, the rouge rate goes up once again. And when the rouge rate goes down again is because we open up a point of use or a collection point to take a microbial sample as an example, it'll go back down. When they close off the microbial sample, rouge rate goes back up until they open another point. So when you think about this, this is actually very simple. Let's say, for those in Singapore, that the red line over here represents going from Derouging to the airport, to Changi. And if you're going through the center and there's a lot of traffic, it can take a while to get there. And depending upon how much traffic is and how often you hit your brakes and your accelerator, will determine what the operational capability is of how much gas you actually consume. But we all know that it's only about 12 kilometers from Derouging all the way over to Changi. So that's represented by the red line. We know how long it is. We know how much it's going to take. But how much rouge actually accumulates over that time period is based upon how much operation or stopping and starting we're going with the system of opening and closing it or recirculating the water, etc. When we recirculate the water without opening it, the rouge rate goes up and stays at a higher level. This is a rouge system over here. Notice we're running between 6.8 nanometers up to 8.2 nanometers over time. And if you look at that, so one month time period doesn't increase more than 1.4 nanometers. But if you look at the blue line underneath it, it's running between 1.6 or 1.5 nanometers and up to as high as 2. And you can see there's these little peaks and they go up and down. What is happening here? Well, this is a water system running at 50 degrees Celsius during the day, but at night, they actually do a sanitization. So they take it up from at 7 o'clock at night, they take it up to 80 degrees C from 50 degrees C. They leave it there for 1 hour. And then at 9 o'clock at night, they let it go back down again. But you can see that the actual accumulation of rouge is very, very small, even though the rouge rate goes up and down cyclical based upon that particular level. So that cyclical nature shows how accurate the rouge monitor can be at these very low levels. And this is below a nanometer at many times where it's manufacturing. We're talking about, 10 angstroms in that level. This is the day they decided to do a derouging passivation. They added phosphoric acid on August the 21st at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And you can see what happened to the rouge rate and accumulation over time. Then on September the 7th downstream, you can see that there's a slight jog. That's the day they did the passivation with the citric acid, actually with direnutra, which is another chemical. But we're going to close in on this data here for a second so you can see what actually happened. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a contractor came in and administered the phosphoric acid. They let it run for 3 hours until 9 o'clock at 7 o'clock at night, 1900 hours. And then at that particular time, they said, okay, we're done with the phosphoric acid. We're going to add the sodium hydroxide. We'll have no problem. We're going to rinse out our system and everything is going to be fine. Well, that's not what the Rouge monitor sees. The Rouge monitor actually, even though they added the sodium hydroxide here, it took almost 24 hours for the system to get back to its pre-level before it administered the chemicals. And the reason for that is the sodium hydroxide and the chemicals remained in the system for a longer period of time than was even shown on the conductivity. So actually, when these people tell you that everything is done with the system after 3 hours, as far as the chemical application and cleaning and doing the derouging and passivation, that is actually erroneous. It's not true, and shown specifically by the data here. So down over here, we talked about September the 7th when they did the passivation for the chromium oxide. They used a chemical called direnutra, which is a pH of 7, which is great for Singapore because the water, you don't have to worry about adding another chemical in order to combat it. If you were using citric acid as an example, you would have to use sodium hydroxide against that in order to administer it. So the interesting thing over here is you can see that there was a slight increase for about an hour when this was applied to do the chromium oxide. And then because it had a very pH of 7 and was rid from the system in a very rapid manner, and the system became very stable after that. So let's talk a little bit about our data and what we actually saw. Data is in single-digit nanogram levels, somewhere between 15 to 40 angstroms. That's where the data is coming through most of the time. You need a very accurate instrument in order to run down at that particular level. Real-time changes in the rouge rate, though, are due to the point of use usage, opening up valves, our flow rates within the system, temperature fluctuations, and the overall operational characteristics of the water system. When the operational characteristics of the water system change due to pressures, flows, temperatures, etc., you'll have changes in the rouge. So you can't say any one particular level is best for rouge or rouge development. You have to deal with the rouge as you operate your water system. You're going to run continuously at 80 degrees Celsius on your WFI water system. You're going to have high rates of rouge, high development, and you're going to have to do derouging passivation. But you need to do derouging passivation based upon science, not based upon color. Discoloration is not an indicator of whether that rouge is actually going to affect your product or not. If the rouge does not affect your product, then it is not an issue. It's very hard for QA, QC people to understand that, but that's the truth. To understand if rouge is in your product, though, you need to measure it at extremely small levels. We're talking about PPT levels in order to see if there's iron oxide or whatever. Usually iron oxides at that level have no effect whatsoever on the product itself, especially if you're doing blood products. If you're doing blood products, having ferric oxide down at PPT levels makes no difference whatsoever to the product you're developing and applying. Accumulation rates over time are easily interpreted because you have a way in order to accumulate that data, in order to show it in either a graphical format or actually in actual values on screen in order to determine that. Alarm limits for control can be set at very, very low levels. It's very important to understand that we can set the alarm limits for whatever we need to, but it should be something that's assignable and makes sense based upon how you operate your system at its given temperatures, flows, etc. So you should always use a scientific assessment in order to show when to do your derouging passivation. There are two different tests that can be used for derouging passivation. One is a destructive test. Take a spool piece out of your system, you send it off to a laboratory and do Auger electron spectroscopy, which is a destructive test, but can determine how much rouge development there is on the surface of the metal. It can be used as an independent measurement in order to compare to your online method that you're using at the same time. Different water systems were sampled at different classifications. In order to look at variances in 3 different water systems. So we have company A, company B, and company C. Company A had a lousy water system, older, probably had components that were not 316L. And you can see the Rouge monitor read 0.7 microns. That's 700 nanometers over 11-month time period. But the Auger electron spectroscopy, when they took it out and ran it in a laboratory, showed virtually the same at 750 nanometers. Point is that it was very good variance between the two and correlation between the two different technologies. Company B, though, you can see we ran it for 10 months and they only had 75 nanometers accumulation, and the Auger showed 80 nanometers accumulation. This was a modern water system that was almost brand new, and it was using newer technology, 316L stainless steel, WFI water system, etc., using vapor compression distillation. Company C was a 12-year-old water system, 316L, had been derouged and passivated yearly over that time period. And you can see that the rouge rate there was a little bit higher at 170 nanometers. And the Auger showed 160. Again, good correlation between the Auger and the online. And the point is that these different water systems rouge at different rates for different reasons. You can't blanketly say that I'm going to do a derouging passivation every year. As an example, what you need to do is to say, look, my nanometer level, as example on company B, is only 75 nanometers. I don't want to do a derouging passivation until I reach 300 nanometers or 400 nanometers or 1 micron or whatever is going to be discernible between you and QC, QA. The point is that if it takes 400 nanometers as an example to get there, it may take me 4 years or 5 years to get there. So why am I performing a derouging passivation every year when I can easily show that I don't have to do it for at least 4 or 5 years? Use scientific data to do derouging passivation frequency. Do not use QA/QC. Queasiness. Do not use just coloration. Use something that makes sense. And that sense is scientific data of how you operate your water system. Not all systems rouge at the same rate, as you can see by this simple table. Operating temperatures, ramp up temperatures, pharmaceutical water classification had no influence on the comparability of the two different methods to determine rouge accumulation. It didn't make any difference whether we were doing Auger or doing online rouge monitoring. But Auger, again, is a destructive test. You have to take into consideration that. And the rouge monitor is, once it's installed, it is not removed. You put the rouge monitor in the system and you leave it there. And any derouging or passivation you do in the future, you let the probe see all the data. Once you're done with the derouging passivation, you can reset the system back to 0 in order to start accumulating from anew, but you don't want to disassemble the probes from the system. Simple conclusions. Online determination of rouge development, rouge thickness development over time without sampling, without labor, without laboratory testing is inexpensive, it's dynamic, and it's integratable to your existing computer and networking schemes. Passivation and repassivation frequencies are based on science and need, not QC queasiness. Once again, you may have SOPs that were written decades ago at your facility. Where are the people who wrote that? How did they come up with these ideas? Why are you using an SOP that has no scientific validity to it? Rouge monitoring units are inexpensive. Saving one passivation annually will pay for the unit many times over. These are not expensive instruments that you can integrate in order to show what you need to do. The cost savings can be tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars per year per site, easily. And depending upon what products you're manufacturing and how expensive those products are, think about now that if you don't have to go on downtime during Christmas shutdown in order to do derouging passivation for 4 days, and you can have the system running and producing product. Installation of the units is based upon the number of loops with risk-based management assessments. Everything we do these days is based on risk-based management, and that includes this also. So that's the conclusion of the presentation. I'll take any questions and comments and probably have Linda read them, and then I can answer them from there.
Thank you, Nissan. We have a few questions already, but if people would like to post their questions in the chat function, or please unmute yourself and ask the question. Also, just one note, if everyone could please help us to fill in the feedback form, that would be very helpful for us for future sessions. The link is in the chat as well, and you can see that. So if you click on it, you can fill that in later and submit that to us. Thank you all very much. Also, the documents and the recording will be sent to you after this session. So the first question comes from Stephen Amadeus, and he asks, is rouging phenomenon also happened in cool looping or ambient temperature other than hot looping?
The answer is yes. Rouge will happen in any water. Think about the Titanic sitting in less than 4 degrees Celsius water at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It's corroding. So it will corrode. It just corrodes at a less amount of rate. So rouge in ambient systems may take 10, 12 years to get to a same rouging level as a hot water system in 6 months. That's a possibility, or a year. So it just depends. Now, the point is that if you want to operate your systems at ambient temperatures, that's fine. If you don't want any rouge at all, don't build it out of stainless steel. Build it out of PVDF. Use PVDF impellers. Use your whole system using PVDF and not stainless steel.
Okay, thank you. A question from Shan Shan, who asks, for a hot looping running at 80C, do we still need to sanitize at 100 daily?
The answer is absolutely not. You cannot have, you should not be running a system for microbials when you have running a hot water sanitization, when you already have a self-sanitizing loop. The point is anything above 65 degrees Celsius will kill microbes. And the point is if you're running continuously above 70 degrees Celsius, all the microbes are dead. You don't have to worry about thermophiles that are hot water bacteria. Those hot water bacteria are in vents and in volcanoes and things of that nature. They're not going to get into your water system, not in Singapore, not in Thailand, not even in Indonesia, where there are volcanoes. So you really don't have to worry about that. So you do not sanitize the system ever if it's sanitized, if your system is running normally at 65 degrees Celsius or higher.
Thank you. Now, from Dwys Molina asks, is there any effect of ozone, O3 sanitation to rouging process? If
the answer to that is nominal And the answer is it's because the ozone runs at such a low level. You know, ozone normally runs only in ambient systems, number one. It's best at 25 degrees Celsius. It can run up to as high as 35 degrees Celsius, fairly okay, but it's better in colder water, 25 degrees and less.
And yes,
The amount of ozone that is actually there is very, very small. So even though it's an oxidant and it can promote oxidation inside the system, it's very small to producing the amount of rouge.
okay, Dries, I hope that that answered your question. If not, please send a follow-up question. The next question is from Evelyn. How to calibrate the sensor and what is the calibration frequency?
The unit comes with a calibration verification probe. Just like you run calibration verifications on temperature and other sensors and conductivity monitors, et cetera, in your system, you can run the same thing on the Rouge monitor. So that particular calibration probe is very simple. You take the adapter off, you leave the probes installed inside the 1.5 inch flange with the clamp already on it. You remove the adapter above the clamp, so the water remains running through the system, even the probe is not connected to the transmitter. The probe goes into the transmitter and it will give you data in conductivity, and there should be 2 conductivity points that it'll measure within 2%, plus or minus 2%, in order to show the calibration verification. You can usually stretch the calibration verification up to 5% if you wish. Anything above 5%, the unit would have to go out for calibration at the factory. There is usually no drift on these particular instruments, and you can show that by doing the calibration verification annually or every 6 months or whatever the frequency is determined to be.
Mohammed Sharil Mohammed Hassan asks a similar question on calibration of the probe and frequency. So I guess you've just answered that.
I did.
Okay, and is there any limitation on the, I think it's Rouge, not Rough, but is there any limitation on the Rouge monitoring system?
Primarily not. It will run from 0 to 200 degrees Celsius. It can run from 0 degrees, like I said, to 200 degrees Celsius. There is no issue with it. There are no moving parts. You do have to change out the battery once every 3 years, once it's installed. But other than that, no, there's no issue and there's no maintenance.
Thank you. Now, Shanshan asks, it was mentioned that impellers not passivated. How will they be managed?
Well, the only way to passivate the impellers technically would be to stop the impellers and to run it while the system is running on derouging and passivation. Can't do that. Why? Because you need the pumps in order to run into the system to make sure that the fluid is going throughout the whole system. That's number one. Number two, because the pump impellers rotate between 3,000 to 8,000 RPMs, even if they were passivated, passivation would last a very, very short amount of time, because that amount of cavitation and that amount of repetition and flow would destroy any of the chromium oxide layer that might be present. So chromium oxide layers are never really present on the impellers because the impellers are never really passivated at all.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions. Fu is asking, based on the Rouge monitoring data, what is the limit in NM that should trigger derouging process?
Depends on your system and how great your Rouge is developed in your system. What you need to do is make a limit that makes sense. You know, is 1 micron a level that you want to do derouging passivation? Maybe. Is a 0.5 micron even better? Maybe. Will you still get Rouge or get unsightly Rouge inside the system? The answer is probably. How does that look in the system? It may be a discoloration, but the point is as the Rouge develops, you have a way in order to monitor it, in order to make a determination. So you need to be able to work with your QA QC department and just say, you know what, the amount of rouge that we're developing per year at 50 microns per year or 100 microns per year, I don't want to do a derouging passivation until I approach 400 microns. When I get to 400 nanometers, not microns, 400 nanometers. If I develop this at 50 nanometers or 100 nanometers, when I get to 400 nanometers, when I choose or I'd like to do a derouging passivation. So it depends on how your system is operating and what temperatures, how much rouge rate there is, whether it's oscillating with temperatures, running at hot temperatures all the time, etc. So
Okay.
operational characteristics will make a difference. What you need to do is come up with a limit that makes sense so that the chemicals and the money that's expended in order to do the derouging passivation makes sense.
Okay.
Someone wrote a SOP 20 years ago and said you have to do it once a year.
All right.
You know why they made it up once a year. And there's no scientific basis in order to show what that frequency needs to be. It's all made up. It's all mythology.
All right, let's move on to the next question. So Tawa Raj asks, if I am running the system with chlorine dioxide solution for disinfection purpose, will it affect rouge and how?
Chlorine dioxide does not affect rouge per se. However, chlorine by its nature needs to be removed because if you're using RO membranes, it will destroy the RO membranes over time. Also, chlorine, once it gets past an RO membrane, is much harder to remove from the system. Even deionization sometimes works in order to get rid of the chlorine. There can even be chlorine breakthrough at that particular time. So depending upon what your system is and how it's developed, chlorine is not a great thing to have, except on the pretreatment side in order to clean up bacteria. My particular point is that if you're running water systems on the pretreatment side in Southeast Asia and in a monsoon effect country, then the best thing to have is ozone and not chlorine dioxide on your pretreatment, because the ozone will take all of that microbial and growth and high temperature stuff and create and convert it into CO2. Then you don't have to deal with the chlorine dioxide downstream.
Okay.
Sulfite.
Quick, this is quite a long question. So this is from Tick asking, if my understanding is correct, the rouge sensor measures the accumulation rate of rouging, but it cannot measure the current rouge that is present in the piping system.
That is correct.
Okay, if we have an existing system that has not been passivated or derouged before, is there any way that we can measure the existing rouge?
Only by taking out a spool piece and running it to Auger electron spectroscopy as a destructive system. So if you want to take a spool piece out, send it off to a laboratory, you can do Auger electron spectroscopy. It means shutting down the water system, getting rid of the water that's in the water system, putting in another spool piece, a new spool piece, etc. The best way to put in a rouge monitor, an online rouge monitor, is directly after you do a derouging passivation or while you do a derouging passivation. So before you do a derouging passivation, install your derouging passivation sensor, or directly after you do the derouging passivation, put in your sensor, having it start with a pristine system at 0 and let it accumulate as the system matures.
Okay, and next question from Mohammed Fariz Iksan asking, is rouging will significantly affect the water conductivity and pH value?
The answer to that is no, but it will affect conductivity. But don't forget, your conductivity in a hot water system is very, very high. It's 0.4 to 0.5 microsiemens. And the point is the reason it's so high is because you have hot water, number one. The water has a certain amount of gases in the water due to the distillation unit that was used. And distilled water never gets to a level better than 0.6 microsiemens.
Okay, we have quite a few more questions, but if anyone wants to still post their questions, even though we've run out of time. We can forward those to Nissan and he can reply to you directly. Or if we can identify you, we can then, and we will identify you and
Best
connect.
situation, Linda, is to have them sent to me. I will send them back to you and
Yeah.
you can send them out to whoever needs to have a response.
Yeah, and you also have Nissan's contact details as well. In the meantime, if we can take just a couple more questions to close.
Of course.
Farrakhan asks, how passivation condition, including chemical types, passivating flow characteristic, etc., is normally determined for rouging removal?
Hire me as a consultant and I will talk to you all about it. The point is that there are different methodologies in order to do this. Citric acid, if it's used for passivation, as an example, flow rates, normal flow rates would run at normal temperatures and pressures. However, you may be looking at 80% and 80 degrees Celsius in order to do that. They're not running necessarily only at ambient temperature. So it depends on how you're going to apply it. Like I said, there's another chemical called Derouging, which runs at a pH of 7 and I think runs at ambient temperatures as an example, which is a different set of dynamics than what we'd be running with citric acid.
Okay, so Chana Basanava, I hope I got the name right, asks, can you please let us know saving of quantity of water approximately, assuming any one system? His point is how this system is going to help in saving water.
Okay. You're going to save water in a various amount of ways. The first way is if you don't do a derouging passivation, you're not wasting water. What do you have to do when you're doing derouging passivation? You have to rinse up the chemicals all the time with perfectly good WFI water or purified water, and you're going to run that directly down into drain. And the question is, how long are you going to do that? Will you do it based upon conductivity? Well, then you may be doing it based upon conductivity, and that may take a certain amount of time, but the actual chemicals in the water may take longer. You may be rinsing up for a series of hours and hours, and all that good WFI water and purified water is going directly to drain. Now, the city of Singapore loves it. However, most people don't. And the reason is that you're paying for the water twice. You have to pay for the water coming in, and you have to pay for the water going down the drain. So here you're wasting a tremendous amount of water, probably tens of cubic meters to hundreds of cubic meters of water by doing all these functions in order to run a system that was probably unwarranted because you didn't have scientific data in order to show or substantiate that particular operation.
Thank you. Now I'm going to allow the last 4 questions to be answered and recorded. So before we finish off this session. So Keith asks, are 904L SS commonly used for water system? Is it true that they are more resistant to rouging?
I didn't understand. What SS?
904L liter?
Yes. Okay. It's a different alloy. And yes, it is more resistant to rouge. If you want no rouge in your system, you can use Hastelloy or AL6XN, which is very similar to 904L. And no, they will not rouge. They are very expensive alloys, probably cost 8 to 10 times more expensive than 316L.
Thank you. Now, Watson TVP asks, low ferrite content of piping, instrument, and valves can help reducing rouge rate or not?
Yes, absolutely. So let's say if we were using titanium as an example, we would have no rouge whatsoever, a very minimal amount of rouge. The point is that the alloys are dependent upon what the designer actually did initially. You know, if I was going to design a WFI water system today, I would do it a non-distilled WFI water system running with RO, EDI, and ultrafiltration, ozonation for my sanitization, running on PVDF. I would be running the system at 25 degrees C or colder all the time. I would never have rouge. I would have excellent water. It would be well sanitized, and I would have no issues whatsoever. Lower ferrite water, lower ferrite piping will rouge less. That is correct. However, the point is, what's the cost offset? So from a CapEx standpoint, it may be outrageous in order to have a different alloy. What I would do if you're going to run 316L is I would put in my impellers. I would put in Hastelloy impellers and Hastelloy pumps so that I wouldn't get any particulate rouge developing downstream. And then I would deal with the rest of the water system, what I need to do as far as rouge and rouge development using an online rouge monitor. Get rid of the particulate, use AL6XN or Hastelloy impellers and a pump. Even though it's more expensive, I'm going to have less rouge in my system.
Okay, question from Olik, Thailand. When we installed new WFI machine, we found red matters in WFI, so we kept draining until the water was cleared. I wonder if it was rouge or not.
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Okay, that was a quick answer. Final question, and I am sorry that we can't answer all the other 5 or 6 questions that follow, but we will send to Nissan. The last question is from Mohammed Al Mohammed. Is rouge connected to microbial contamination of water system?
There are people who say that rouge and microbials are somewhat interactive. The answer to that is it has to do with the ferric ions that are in the water. There are some bacteria that like ferrous oxide. So I mean, they do exist. Is it prevalent? The answer is no. Is there a real relationship you can show between microbial and rouge? The answer is some microbiologists will say yes, others will say no. I've never seen in a water system biofilm and rouge at the same time, because biofilm only exists in ambient temperatures. You're going to have less rouge at ambient temperatures anyway. You can't have hot water systems and have bacteria. So you can't necessarily say that there's a relationship between them. Could there possibly be a relationship in cold water systems running at 10 degrees Celsius between bacteria and rouge? The answer is, yeah, possibly. Have I ever seen data to show that? The answer is negligible.
Well, thank you very much, Nissan, for your time this morning, evening for you. I hope that this webinar has been helpful to everyone, and we look forward to welcoming you back for our future.
And I'd love to get back to Singapore when COVID is over too, and to all of Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And the reason is I'm much taller there.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your time and expertise with us.
Yeah, and anyone can contact me. They always know me as Dr. Nissan in Southeast Asia. So no problem. More than willing to answer any of the questions that you might get. You can send those to me, Linda, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, thank you everybody for joining this morning. We leave you to enjoy the rest of your day. And we will be sending the link to the handouts and the presentation after this session. And also you can contact Nissan directly with your questions. Please do also fill in the survey form, which we'll send you the link to as well. So without further ado, thank you very much and have a good evening, Nissan.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.